Any fisherman will tell you that no trip out on the open ocean is ever the same. The murky waters are still full of mysteries and secrets yet to be uncovered, and you never know what strange objects or creatures can suddenly appear in your fishing nets. This, on top of the fact that the open oceans can be some of the most challenging environments to tread, can make it go from as calm as a night in a village to as rough and dangerous as Detroit City at New Year. This is why most fishermen are at least somewhat relieved when they can head back to shore after a couple of long and hard days of fishing. But when this fishing crew encounters something they would have never expected on their way back home, none of them hesitate to spring into action immediately. The fishing crew aboard the Golden Delight has experienced this to the fullest extent, but what they found in the water might just make it all worth it. They have been out on the open ocean for going on almost 2 full weeks now. This is a lot longer than normal, but they barely managed to catch anything the first couple of days, and they could not afford to return to the harbor empty-handed. These hardworking people don't have a lot of cash saved up for days on which they would return empty-handed. Being a fisherman is a difficult and dangerous job, but it sadly doesn't have a salary to match. Keeping all of this in mind, the main problem is that, due to overfishing, there are often days where a lot less profitable fish are caught compared to just a couple of years ago, metaphorically and literally. Thus, they decided to change strategy and head further out in the direction of waters they knew had less traffic from other fishing boats and would thus increase their chances. It took them a while to get there, but luckily their efforts were not in vain. They found a large patch of open water completely absent of other fishing boats and thus had no competition. The first time their nets touched the water, they knew there was a large chance they had struck gold. Especially when they started pulling it in, the net was tougher to pull back in than it had been in almost a year. With a lot of effort, they managed to get it on board and gazed in awe at the incredible mass of fish moving frantically on the deck of the ship. The first net was full of fish. They managed to catch the largest amount of fish they had ever gotten on a single fishing trip. The storage space was completely packed after only 2 days of fishing in this spot. The crew was overjoyed and celebrated with every haul they got on board. Their luck just seemed to know no bounds those 2 days. Besides all the fish they hauled in, they also saw some other amazing animals out on the open waters. But the whales that pulled up beside their ship must have been the most spectacular by far. With the storage of the ship filled to the brim, they were finally ready to head back home. They couldn't wait any longer. Otherwise, the fish had a chance to go bad, which would mean all of their efforts would have been in vain. After all, they encountered very dangerous waters on their way home that were almost impossible to navigate. They had to make a detour to avoid taking a chance that they might never come back from. This added at least 2 more days to their trip. What this meant was first going back in the direction they came from to avoid the stormy waters from overtaking them. When they were out far enough, they would be able to circle around the storm. They knew, however, that this would cost them much more time. This also did not mean they would be sailing through calm water. The storm was faster than they were, but it would mean that they would probably avoid the roughest and most dangerous parts of it. Luckily for them, the calculations of the captain were correct. Exhausted from being out at sea for this long and suffering from a severe shortage of fresh water and food, the crew was desperate to get home. But they knew that any land was still at least a couple of days away. They would have to hold out a little longer. They were lucky to be on a well-stocked fishing boat at that point because there was plenty of fish to eat, and the water they managed to catch from the storm would at least make sure they would not dehydrate completely on the trip. If they managed to make haste back to shore, the rest of the crew spent their days playing cards or dice and looking out over the endless sea. With a bit of luck, they would sometimes see some sea life surface, but this was rare. They were bored and couldn't stand the smell of fish anymore. Luckily, they were only about a day away now. If what the captain said was true, they couldn't see any land yet, but they had spotted a couple of boats in the distance a while ago. They considered approaching them and asking for some water, but this would only delay them further, because they couldn't be sure that the people on the other boats had any water to spare, or would even be willing to share it with strangers. They decided not to take the risk and just head straight for the shore, determined not to let anything delay them more. Then suddenly, they saw one of the most beautiful sights appear right in front of their eyes. They saw land far in the distance, just reaching above the horizon. The crew was ecstatic and seemed to have a whole new burst of energy. They were screaming and celebrating like they had won the lottery. With all the crew celebrating, one member couldn't take their eyes off the land. He was finally about to get home. But then, something emerged from the water that caught his eye. It took him a few moments to adjust to what he was seeing. It was a beautiful and obviously mature dolphin. Now, this in itself was not a rare sight. They had seen multiple dolphins already on their trip, and almost every time they went out on the water, they would encounter a multitude of these incredible creatures. These majestic creatures were fairly common where they normally caught their fish. They always had to be careful not to accidentally catch one in their nets. This had happened to them a couple of times before, but they were luckily always able to set it free again in relatively good condition. But there was something off about this particular dolphin. It seemed to be struggling to move or to dive back down. It only took the perceptive crewmate a couple of moments to understand what was going wrong for this normally majestic creature. Its tail seemed to be caught in a big and heavy fishing net. This was probably discarded by another fishing boat, or maybe even by them. They too had lost a couple of their nets and other equipment to the unpredictable mistress that is the ocean. The dolphin looked extremely tired from carrying the heavy net around. Who knows how long it had been trapped in it? Obviously, it had been long enough to be separated from its pod because there were no other dolphins in sight when the crewman was looking around. When the crew member fully realized what he was witnessing, he immediately alerted the other crewmates. It took a little while for them to understand what was happening because they were still celebrating the sighting of land to their heart's content. The crew spotted the dolphin just as it was about to pass them. This would have been their chance to catch it and help it if they were closer, but there was still a sizable distance between them and the creature. It would be impossible to quickly catch it. When everybody on the ship was fully aware of the struggling dolphin's presence, it had already passed them by. It was going in the opposite direction. Now that everybody knew what was going on, they had a decision to make. Was it worth it to them to turn the boat around and chase after the helpless dolphin in an attempt to catch it and free it from the net, even if it meant they would be away from land and home even longer? Or did they just want to go home and not bother helping the animal? The decision was made within a second, and everybody on the boat wholeheartedly agreed. They would go after the dolphin. Some people might think that because they catch fish for a living, fishermen have no regard for the lives of marine creatures. Fishermen appreciate and respect the sea. It, and all the life in it, are incredibly important to their survival, and they know they can't live without it. It is kind of similar to a farmer and his cattle. He loves all his animals even if he knows that he will eventually have to kill some of them. The captain quickly turned the boat around and started chasing after the dolphin. They saw that it was trying to dive multiple times, but it almost came back to the surface immediately. It probably couldn't propel itself downwards with its tail trapped like that. The boat quickly caught up to the dolphin. At first, it tried to get away by changing direction, but after a couple of attempts, the dolphin just stayed next to the boat calmly. The fishermen didn't know if this was because the creature knew they wanted to help or because it was just too exhausted to get away. The fishermen didn't have a good way to get the creature on board, so they decided to use the very thing that was seemingly hurting this dolphin so much. They threw out their own net, and to their surprise, they managed to trap it on their first attempt. They pulled the obviously tired creature on board without it struggling or protesting too much. When it was on the deck of the boat, they quickly undid it from their own net before they could turn their attention to the net that was still wrapped around its tail. It only took two of the stronger crew members to hold the creature relatively still while the deck leader took his knife and carefully started cutting the net away. It didn't take him long to cut a couple of the thick threads, which allowed the whole net to come off easily. They quickly inspected the creature to see if it had any other injuries related to this unfortunate incident, but it seemed to be in good condition. It was also already starting to look and act more lively now that its tail was completely freed again. The crew members quickly opened the ledge on the side of the deck, and with a little pushing and shoving, they managed to get the dolphin off the boat and back into the water. It immediately dived deep down, and they couldn't see it anymore. Satisfied with their work, they quickly closed the ledge and started cleaning up the deck while the captain set course back in the direction of land. This whole ordeal probably added at least 5 to 6 more hours to their journey, but everybody on the ship knew they made the right decision. On their way back to shore, they suddenly saw a dolphin jumping alongside the boat. They were almost positive it was the same dolphin they had just saved. With how intelligent these creatures are, it is not unlikely that this was its way of thanking the crew for saving it. With the crew finally back on shore after a long and hard journey, they now not only had a lot of fish to sell, ensuring them a well-deserved paycheck, but they also left the boat with a great story to tell and an unforgettable experience.